Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. So I love a good themed reading month, at least in theory. I even run my own year-long reading challenge with a prompt and a different theme each month, so I should be quite good at this sort of thing. And yet, the second that I put together a themed reading list, and I mean like the very second the last book sits on top of the TBR pile, I find every other book on my shelves calling out to me, whispering, "Pick me." I don't know what that says about me, other than I perhaps suffer from oppositional defiant disorder against myself. But this November I am determined to overcome this bad behaviour and give Nonfiction November a good old college try. It will be my first time joining in with this, and since I mostly read literary fiction, it feels like a fun way to shake things up and step outside my comfort zone. And handily, the prompt for the Read Good Challenge for November is No Comfort November, where you should read something that is not in your usual comfort zone of reading. I'm setting myself the goal of reading at least 3 non-fiction books this month, though I have picked out a reading list of potentials that is quite a bit longer than that, and I've got a mixture of everything from memoir to history to true crime and narrative non-fiction. In this video I'm going to run through this pile of possibilities, this syllabus if you will, in case you are also on the lookout for some non-fiction books to dive into this month. You may be able to grab these from your local library or an indie bookshop, or maybe you are just as bad as me and some of these are already sitting on your shelves unread, waiting for you to pick them up. Or perhaps you don't give two shits about non-fiction and you are here anyway, and for that I am grateful. Unusually for me, I've not made any notes about what I want to say of these books, so I'm sort of flying by the seat of my pants. So this isn't going to be any in-depth look at any of these titles, but I will show you each one, tell you what I remember about it, and I guess most interestingly, why I'm interested in it, what made me pick it up, what is it about the book that's making me want to stray from my usual reading habits. Either way, let's get into it, and I'll start off with a couple of books from this year's Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, and the first one I'll talk about is one that I've shown a couple of times on the channel lately, but have still not made any further progress than the 10 pages I read when I first got my hands on it, and that is The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clarke. This was shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford and also won this year's Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. Rachel Clarke is a working doctor. I think she might be a GP, I'm not sure, but she's going to be able to tell this story with a reasonable amount of authority, and that story that she's telling is about a heart transplant. It's about a child whose heart was given up when they died for the purposes of a transplant, and the child whose life that heart saved. And I think in amongst that sort of very emotional story, it might give a bit of a history of transplant surgery and how much progress we've made in that area of medical practice. As I mentioned, I read about 10 pages of this. There was no real reason that I put it down. I just had a bunch of other stuff I was reading at the same time. But I loved what I read, and I'm looking forward to getting back to it because the reviews I've heard from people who I trust have raved about it. And yeah, I think I'm going to be in very good hands with this one. The other book from this year's Women's Prize longlist that I have on my shelves is Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton, and I think this has got a very lovely cover. That's a very striking image of a hare, although I've just recently watched, as sort of my spooky season Halloween movie, The Witch, the one with 2 V's instead of the W, and in that there is a pretty creepy hare that appears. And so I'm looking at this slightly differently. This isn't a creepy book though. This is supposed to be a very heartwarming book about Chloe Dalton's experience of finding a baby hare and sort of saving it and raising it. And I don't know much more than that. It sounds like quite a simple premise, but one I expect is going to have a lot to say about our connection to other living things, our connection to life and love and nature. And given the state of the world, I think sometimes those simple things can be the most rewarding. So I am looking forward to this, and I've just noticed that one of the blurbs on the back is from Angelina Jolie. I don't know why it surprises me that she might read books, but I guess she does. She too must be a mere mortal like the rest of us. It's also got a very cute little baby version of that hare on the back. Then I've got a book that I've heard incredible things about from a former Booker winner. This is Question 7 by Richard Flanagan, who won the Booker for his novel The Narrow Road to the Deep North I don't know when was it, like 2007 or something. This is a non-fiction book. It won the Baillie Gifford, which is like the biggest non-fiction prize in the UK. But I have heard about this sort of towing the line between novel and memoir or autobiography, and it is supposed to be quite novelistic in its execution. It's the story of, I think, Richard Flanagan's parents and his own life, but it's told in the context of like bigger world events. It says on the back that it's told by way of H.G. Wells and Rebecca West's affair through 1930s nuclear physics to Flanagan's father working as a slave labourer near Hiroshima. So it's all about chains of events, of inevitability, of how we find ourselves, or specifically, I guess, how Richard Flanagan finds himself in the life that he is living. And I already like the idea of like chains of events and bringing sort of nuclear physics into it, because that's all about sort of chain reactions that are controlled, and when they are not, they have disastrous consequences. So that sounds super interesting to me. And speaking of nuclear physics, the next book I'm considering turning to is by Adam Higginbotham, who wrote the book Midnight in Chernobyl, which was the basis for the excellent HBO TV show Chernobyl. But Higginbotham's latest book has also been quite the sensation, and that is Challenger, a true story of heroism and disaster on the edge of space. And this is an account of the Challenger disaster that happened in the mid-1980s when the American space shuttle Challenger disintegrated, and it did so live on TV with millions of people in America and around the world watching on. This purports to be telling the true full story of what happened on that day, and I suppose the events leading up to the disaster. And people I know who have read this have said it is just incredibly gripping, which I hope is the case because it's actually really long. Oh no, there are quite a lot of notes in here. Ooh, there's even a diagram of some space shuttle stuff, which is pretty cool. I do love space stuff though, so I'm very excited about this one. And while we are on the topic of space stuff, the next book I'll mention is 7 Brief Lessons in Physics by Carlo Rovelli, translated from, I assume, Italian by Simon Carnell and Erica Segre. Rovelli is an Italian theoretical physicist, and this is a very short book with a very big font that just has 7 short chapters that cover some of the biggest, most profound, most interesting things going on in physics, I guess, as at the time this was written, because obviously science changes all the time, and so much has changed with the James Webb Space Telescope and what we're learning from that. I just find physics and space really interesting. My husband and I watch so much space YouTube. I cannot tell you how many videos we've watched on black holes. Do I understand them? Absolutely not. But they are really, I guess, just mind-blowingly interesting, and they really put into perspective like our place in the universe. And so I love stuff like this. I have had this for a very long time, and I've got no excuses for not having read it because it is really short. This is by far the shortest book in this pile, and I should just bite the bullet and get on with it. Then I have a memoir called Stay True by Hua Hsu. This won the Pulitzer, I assume, for memoir a couple of years ago, and this is a coming-of-age story of Hua Hsu's experience meeting and befriending someone at college who he didn't like at first, and then they became very firm friends, and then that friend's death in a sort of a senseless attack, and him reckoning with that. It is supposed to be highly emotional. I think there's a lot of photography stuff in here because the author is a photographer, perhaps. Maybe I have misremembered that, but I've heard very good things about it, and it is endorsed by the master of narrative nonfiction, Patrick Radden Keefe, on the front. And that leads me very elegantly into my next pick, which is Patrick Radden Keefe's Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland. And I was given this book a couple of years ago for my birthday by a friend, and I've been very interested in getting to it because I read Empire of Pain, which is another narrative nonfiction by Keefe, and it was just brilliant. It was so gripping, it was so interesting, it was grappling with these really real and present problems, sort of telling the history of it, but also how it relates to today. And yeah, I found it really fascinating. He is a master of sort of keeping you interested in these stories and picking out the threads that are both deeply personal, but also have something profound to say. And this is his account of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and I think it looks at the 70s and 80s. And if I'm totally honest, I feel like I am woefully uninformed about that shameful chapter in British and Irish history, and I'd like to know more about it. I recently read a collection of short stories, which is Everyone's Still Here by Radden Ni Chuin. I do not know if I'm saying that author's name correctly. I normally look it up and find the author saying their name themselves, but this author is anonymous and does not do any press, so I can't find any example of them saying it. So if you speak Gaelic and you can tell me how to say this name, it will really help, because I'll be reviewing this book soon and then I'll be able to get it right. But it was a really interesting account of the knock-on effects of the Troubles on sort of modern day Northern Irish people. And so reading something like Say Nothing feels like a really logical next step to learn a bit more about that, now that I'm feeling quite engaged with the topic. Then the next book that I'm considering reading is Margo Jefferson's Constructing a Nervous System. And I don't want to be superficial or anything, but a big part of the appeal of this book is that this cover is absolutely gorgeous. Like, this has got to be the best cover of all of these books. I think it's just beautiful, but the book itself also sounds brilliant. So this is a memoir of Jefferson reflecting on all of the artists and thinkers that have shaped her, and particularly Black American thinkers who have informed her, I guess, how to make space for herself in a society where historically it's been very difficult to be an artist, to express yourself, to have the freedom to do so. This won the Folio Prize a few years ago, which I think is now called the Writers' Prize and is also on a hiatus, but it won in the non-fiction category, and I have had my eye on it ever since. So I'm very much interested in seeing what Jefferson has to say. Moving then from the US to Australia, and a relatively recent addition to my shelves, I'm considering reading This House of Grief by Helen Garner. And this is an interesting book to have come under the spotlight recently. Helen Garner is an Australian author who's been working for decades, I believe, and this book originally came out in 2014, but it was picked as a book club pick for Service 95, which is sort of the book club and culture, is it an organisation thing set up by Dua Lipa? And as a result of that, there's been a lot more interest in this book on book-related social media. This is a true crime book and an account of Helen Garner's experience going along to this high-profile trial in which a father crashed his car and it resulted in the death of his 3 sons. And from what I understand about it, it's very multi-dimensional in how it tackles what might feel like a very black and white case. I suppose one thing I'm excited about is that if I read this, I can then watch the interview Dua Lipa does with Helen Garner reflecting on the book, and I imagine she might have some things to say, not just about the case and how she wrote this, but also about how it feels 10 years later to still be talking about this and have renewed interest in it. Right, apologies for that sound blip. I just realised that my microphone has disconnected itself, but fear not, we've got a backup. But moving on to the next book, which is another one I think is going to be very emotionally heavy because the subject matter is pretty sad, is The Last Act of Love by Cathy Rentzenbrink. And it doesn't have the subtitle on the cover for some reason, but the subtitle is The Story of My Brother and His Sister. And this is a memoir about Cathy Rentzenbrink's experience of her family taking care of her brother, who just before he received his GCSE results, so like 15, 16 years old, he was hit by a car and ended up in a permanent vegetative state. And his family cared for him over a period of years. and over time had to come to terms with, like, what does it mean to lead a good life? Like, what is quality of life, and how do we measure that? And at what point do you have to let go and say goodbye? And even just talking about that sounds incredibly sad to me. But I've seen really beautiful rave reviews for this book, so I'm really interested in experiencing that, even if it is going to make me weep like a small baby. And then the final book I have in this pile is one I got from the library just yesterday, and I've already started it, and I'm already like 90 pages in, and that is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, Instructions on Writing and Life. And I've heard a few people recommend this as a great book to read about writing. Anne Lamott is a novelist, but she is also a creative writing teacher, and she introduces this book as being basically everything that she would try to cover in her classes for her students. And it's very conversational. She's quite funny and witty. And so far, it's easy breezy and I'm enjoying it. You may be wondering, why am I reading a book about writing? And it's because I have taken some tentative steps towards writing something. I've always wanted to write. I guess a lot of people like the idea of writing perhaps more than the reality, and that's certainly been the case for me over the years. But I went to a writing workshop, just a one-day thing, a couple of weeks ago, and it just gave me this wave of enthusiasm. And so I've started doing something, and reading this book has some nice writing tips that I think will help when I inevitably hit a wall or start to lose enthusiasm for the work. Whether this thing that I'm working on will get finished, or if I will just become sick of the sight of it and give up, I do not know. Perhaps it will never get finished. Perhaps it will get finished and it will be absolutely terrible. But for now, I am having fun with it and enjoying the process. And I'm trying to read a few bits to keep me going. So that's it for this video. As I mentioned, I'm going to try and read 3 of these books this month. I'm obviously not going to read them all, but it is nice to know that if I do get the non-fiction bug and I want to turn to more, then I've got plenty on my shelves to pick from next month and the month after and the month after that. I think in terms of the ones that I'm most likely to get to, I am very excited about both of the chunky ones, but I doubt I'm going to read them both. So I think I'm more likely, as of right now, to read Say Nothing. I'm really, really looking forward to that. And then from the rest, I think I might be most interested in This House of Grief by Helen Garner and The Richard Flanagan. I've just picked those 3 off the top of my head based on like gut instinct, but it is interesting. I think all 3 of those ones are ones that perhaps have more novelistic or gripping tendencies. So maybe that's what I'm in the mood for. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments if you are participating in Nonfiction November and which books you are looking forward to reading. And also any that I've talked about today that you have read and you would highly, highly recommend I prioritise. Please do let me know. But until next time, toodles.